Thank you all for joining us. This is the Hispanic Well-Being Index briefing from the Hispanic Collaborative. As you may know, Hispanic Collaborative has been operating in the seven-county region now for 1 year, and much of this year has been devoted to sharing and looking at information, developing our community working groups, and developing the initial tactics and around our strategic priorities, all of which are meant to move us up the Hispanic Well-Being Index. As you know, our initial index was created from the data of the 2016 Latino study done by the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And this initial update of our index was recalculated based on current data. I am Nancy Hernandez. I'm the president of the Hispanic Collaborative. Also on our call today is Andrea Barrutia, who is the head of the Director of Community Engagement for our organization. We're happy to bring this to you, and we are committed to recalculating this index each and every year. So what we are doing today is we'll explain a little bit about the index and what variables go into it. The 2016 study, as you well know, all of this data, it derives from the census, and so there is a lag in data. So even though the initial index and the initial report was 2016, it was done from 2014 data. We have moved it to the newest data set available, which is 2018 data. So let me jump in to the variables that are on our index. So what I'm showing you are two things that we'll first take a look at just to ground ourselves in what is part of this index, and most importantly, why is it important to us here in Milwaukee and in relation to the Hispanic community here. So on the left side of this slide, we see the Well-Being Index and just a representation of some of the cities and what those points are. So based on the initial data, Baltimore was the top city, and closing out that top 10 was Seattle. The midway point was Tampa. Milwaukee, as you know, was 39th out of 50 cities, and Philadelphia was number 50. What goes into this index, which is again one number that represents how, as a way to compare ourselves against all of those other cities, but has a lot of different facets in it. The index variables then are listed on the right-hand side, and you will see there are 20 variables, and we break them up into different categories so you can see what these categories represent in our daily lives. So we have roughly 10 variables that fall under income and wealth. They measure things such as home ownership rate, the purchasing power of our households, both the median household income and the disparity with to the white non-Hispanic population, and different measurements of poverty, what percentage of our population lives in a variety of different levels of poverty. We also measure that next color band, our employment variables. So we break out both the 20 to 24 segments in male and female population, as well as the percentage of the 25 to 54 employment section. We also look at a number, which is number 11, called the percentage of disconnected youth. And in this case is a measurement of those between 16 and 24 that are neither in school nor working. The last section that we measure, we call health variables, health-related variables, and those represent 16 through 20, teen pregnancy rate, infant mortality rates. We look at heart disease rates, and then we also look at what percentage of our population is covered with insurance. So we take the same approach, we took the same variables, and what we did was we updated the data from 2014 data to 2018 data, which is again the most current data available to us. We're going to look at what happened in two ways. One is we first want to explain in each of these index variables, how did we do? So for instance, did our teen pregnancy rate go up or down? Did we make improvements on it? Did our male 20 to 24 employment rate go up or down? So we'll first look at that dimension. But the index doesn't just measure outcome. That outcome then is compared to the pace of increases or decreases in other cities. And that's what gives us our ranking. So we will first look at how did those variables do. So looking at those same data variables, 1 through 20, in the same sections, in the same order that they're in, we did just a quick color coding here of which variables improved and which variables declined. So you can see out of 20 variables, we improved in outcome on 17 of those variables. Where outcomes declined were in male employment rates, both segments 20 to 24 and 25 to 54. We saw declines in the employment rate, and we also saw greater mortality rates from heart disease, meaning our outcomes declined. We fared worse in those three categories. So overall, you see a lot of green here, which means that we made improvements, and that gives us a good basis going into how does this translate with our comparison to other cities. So to do that, we want to ground you we're going to give you a graph. It's going to look pretty confusing, but we'll walk you through what it is. And what we want to do is share with you kind of the overall picture and how it translates so we know kind of where our outcomes are. So this is a representation of 2014 data. And this graph then, all of those black bars are really just numerically the rank that those outcomes gave us. So we looked at, for instance, let's look at one of our health variables, and I'm using my cursor here, in teen pregnancy. And we were ranking in teen pregnancy of whatever our outcome was in 2014, slightly around 38. If we look at the employment variables, this high point here, which was our highest ranking variable at about number 7, this was based on female employment 20 to 24. So our outcomes then, and compared to all other cities, all of these other 50 cities, this lays out kind of a stepladder of where we were in comparison to them. This bar down here, 39, that should be a familiar number to you. That was our overall ranking. So if we look at these, each of them contribute equally to what our ranking is. We do not weight any of these. And all of these come out to a ranking of an overall 39, as the 2014 data will show, against all of the other 50 peer cities. So now what we want to do is on this same graph, we're going to show you new bars, which is basically taking the same variable and showing you where it is from a ranking perspective. So this is what that looks like. So while this does look, it looks pretty confusing, we're basically looking at the same data. All of those black bars, as a reminder, are 2014 rankings, and the red bars is based on 2018 data. So we can see here in concentrated poverty, this shows a green arrow on top, which is a reminder to us that in this variable, we improved in outcomes and we improved in ranking here. So our red bar is above where we are in our black bar. So if we remind ourselves of those three variables that we actually lost in outcomes, that we fared worse on, they were male employment, both 20 to 24 and 25 to 54. So these two black bars show where we were in ranking compared to our other cities in 2014. And you can see that our outcomes also corresponded to big drop in our ranking to 2018 data. So we went roughly from our score comparing at a point of 25 with the other 50 cities for employment 25 to 54 male, down to almost 40. And in male employment 20 to 24, that went from a ranking of about 18 down to a ranking of about 44. So the red bars, again, are how we rank in each of these variables based on 2018 data, and whether it's above or below it lets you know what our movement was for that specific variable compared to our other 50 cities. So what does this mean for our overall ranking? Well, one thing we can see just by looking at this off the bat is that most of the red bars are below where the black bars are. And that tells us that we are going to have a lower ranking, meaning we fared worse against our peers overall. So that corresponds to where we are here. If you recall, we were at 39 overall, and then we are now, based on 2018 data, have shifted to a position of 44th overall. So just to recap, even though we improved in 17 out of 20 variables, others improved at a faster rate, and we had 3 variables where we did not improve. And based on what all happened at all of the other 49 cities that most likely improved at bigger rates than we did, our ranking dropped from 39th to 44th. So let me show you a little bit about what the top 10 looks like, because again, that is our goal, to be in that set of top 10. The previous ranking, as you see on the left-hand side, Baltimore was number 1, Seattle holding that number 10 position, and all of the cities in between. The new updated data shows that 6 of those cities retained positions in top 10, and there were 4 newcomers into the top 10 ranking: Austin, Salt Lake City, Denver, and San Diego all improved into the top 10 status. And we'll talk a little bit about who were maybe some of the big winners and the big losers on the next slide. On the bottom, you'll see again, just to recap, Milwaukee moved from 39th to 44th in ranking. So we did see some big movement, a lot of increases from key cities. Atlanta, Austin, Salt Lake City, Nashville, and Louisville all saw double-digit increases. And you'll see 2 of those cities, Austin and Salt Lake City, made it into the top 10 with their increases. One of the things that we know that drove this, if we look at those 20 variables, these cities all had very big improvements in their median household incomes, and that corresponded with big reductions in their poverty levels. And that's really what drove, when we look at an analysis of why these cities moved up in this kind of increase, that we saw these double-digit increases. So we know that brings us to kind of two questions. I promised you that's the last of the numbers slide. I know some people love these kinds of slides and some people don't. I hope many of you like it, but that is the last slide that I will show you with, that's primarily numbers. But then if we take a step back, I think the big question for us is kind of what does all of this data mean in re-looking and recalculating this index and the movements that we saw from other cities. And then more importantly, as everybody's lives have changed, what does this mean now in our COVID-19 world? So let me start by taking the first question. So what does this mean? Well, I think one of the big takeaways that we have by looking at the movement in other cities is that increasing household income is key for us. So that is really one, affirming for one of our strategic priorities, being upskilling, moving folks from lower skilled, lower paying positions into higher skilled, higher paying positions, with the end goal of increasing median household income. That is the Hispanic Prosperity and Vitalities Committee, their mission. So that is affirming for us that increasing that household income is key to moving us up on the ranking. The other thing that it pointed out for us is that there's also something happening with our 20 to 24-year-old males with their drop, big drop, even more so than the 25 to 54 drop in their employment ratings, because we're looking at that data and comparing it to other data that we have where we see increasing graduation rates, for instance, in MPS of high schools. So this tells us that we need to dissect that a little more, that this might be a problem area for our community, that we specifically want to understand the dynamics that are happening there and see if we can take that 20 to 24-year-old age demographic male and help them find their into workforce or into schooling and support that segment more. The one thing that I think this does also tells us, and that is why it is in bold, because for me and for our board that has looked at this, this is one of the key takeaways, which is if we look at the slide, and I can go back to it. If we look at the slide that just juxtaposes the green and the red, of did we improve or did we not improve in each of these categories? I'll remind you that each of these, most of these, 17 out of 20, are green, which shows sometimes modest, sometimes important increases in each of those variables. So we think that this highlights the sense of urgency, because one thing it tells us is that even if we had modest increases in these variables, it's still not what is possible and what we are seeing in terms of the pace of change in other cities. So we need to continue to learn from other cities, understand how they're triaging these key strategic areas that we're focused on, and it does tell us that it's possible, but it also highlights the sense of urgency for us to dig into that, and that we can't be comforted by an increase if others are increasing faster around us. So with that, that's, I think, a perfect segue into that second question. That is really, what does this mean now in the COVID-19 world? And I'll answer that first by sharing some data points related to what this means. So the first one, this is a chart that we utilize with the Prosperity and Vitality Committee that pretty much showcases what this committee is trying to do. Move folks from here that doesn't have a lot of pay and doesn't have strong demand into these areas that are higher paying and have more demand from a workforce perspective. So this is a summary of where Hispanics are working today in our region. Well, just by looking at this, 80% of our workforce is in 4 industries: food prep and serving, building and grounds, farming, fishing, forestry, production. 3 of which, right, restaurants, food manufacturing, food production, building and grounds, janitorial, and production being light industrial, 3 of which are most likely working today. They probably are under the essential business guideline and are working today, but maybe not tomorrow. Certainly we understand that, especially if we think of restaurants and food service, takeout isn't the same revenue producer that being operating in, so we're not sure where that is. So they're in the eye of the storm of going out, probably the majority of them most days, and needing to work in the industries that they're in. The other, and we have 80% of our workforce concentrated in that area. The other then is, this is a chart that we show as part of entrepreneurship and innovation that shows where are our Hispanic-owned businesses. And we typically use this to compare it to what's possible in national and general Milwaukee front. But here we're just looking at where are our businesses distributed. 75% of our businesses are in highly affected industries. So if we think of the difference of, certainly professional, science, and technical, those are businesses that are much more likely to be able to work from home, to not necessarily have strong interruptions in their revenue, as opposed to accommodations and food service. So 75% of our businesses are in industries that are highly affected by COVID-19 and what's happening in the world today. And we'll also share that about 2/3 of all Hispanic-owned businesses, and I will share that this is a national SBA statistic. We are looking for more local definitive information on this, but we are applying the national average on here. About 2/3 of all businesses, all Hispanic-owned businesses, are immigrant-owned. That's important for us to know, because certainly an immigrant-owned business may not have the same access to some of the resources that are currently being deployed under some of the federal and state resources, financial assistance coming through. The last slide I will show is from today. This is the Milwaukee County dashboard of coronavirus cases that are showing. So the map on the right shows it by zip code, and in 53204 and 53215, which are about 70% Hispanic, a big concentration of our population lives right here, which we call the near south side. We can see a red ring followed by an emerging yellow ring in there. And if we look above it, this is the hot spot that we've been hearing about a lot on the media in the African American communities in the number of cases. The map on the right digs in a little bit more, and you can see that the blue is an initial outbreak, and then that goes to red, and then that will go to yellow as those cases increase. But in this 53204, 53215, we see where we have a hot spot emerging also in red in that key area. So going back to the question, what does this mean now? Well, we think that this means that there needs to be we need to be active and intentional in our mitigation strategies for not just how we deal with COVID-19 today, but are we setting the groundwork so that it has minimal impact in long-term recovery? What we also think is that sharing information is not enough, and thank you for the entire community I know has been actively sharing information, helping to get resources put together in language, and all of those efforts are very much needed. But we need to move from sharing information to ensuring that our population is taking advantage of the resources and help that is available, because that's not just going to impact their outcome today, that is going to impact their outcome for how well we can recover economically in the long term. And that leads us to that third bullet, which is if we think about a typical recovery from a recession, what we want to do is ensure that we are flattening our own long-term economic curve. So we have to think not just about what we're doing today, but what are some steps that we can do to make sure that our community is positioned in the best way moving forward. And I think that that last bullet that was a part of the answer in the first question, which was just what does this mean, highlights again the sense of urgency now in a COVID-19 world. So we have time for just a few questions, and I am happy to take them. You can do this a multitude of ways. You can raise your hand, and I have a way to see you, and I can unmute you and allow you to answer the question, or you are also welcome to type a question in. We are recording this, so we will send this out to all of you who participated today so that you can share that out with your networks. And you know, we are committed to calculating this index every year, and we will soon begin to see the outcomes of our work as part of it. And I suspect that we will also see the outcomes of those instances that we can't control, such as COVID-19, also appear in this index. Do we have any questions? Okay, I am not hearing any questions. Let me just re-look one more time at our hands. What we do. Okay, we have a question from Alberto Maldonado. Alberto, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Just curious, just because of the work I do, and the list of cities that have been emerging or are populated now into the list, I see Austin and I see a number of other cities. How much can you share about the correlation of the educational attainment of folks in those and some of those cities that occupy that top 10, given that Austin is home to the flagship institution for the state of Texas? I see Louisville, I see a number of other, major cities, and I can't help but to think that education attainment and college graduation and high school graduation plays a key factor in a lot of the upper mobility of some of these communities.
Yeah, that's a great question, Alberto, and you are correct. If we did some analysis on this, and we revisit that each time we also recalculate the data. But if we look at the top correlating variables, so meaning what is a variable that as it moves up or down can take others up or down with it. And our top two correlating variables are education, and specifically what we measure here is the percentage of high school graduates, as well as the percentage of the population with a college degree. So though that is a high correlating variable, as is segregation is also a correlating variable for us. And what I can share in terms of high school and college educational attainment, in both of those areas, high school, pretty much our outcome was flat, meaning our overall scoring remained the same, but we did drop in ranking for high school from 27th to 32nd. And in college, we saw almost the same thing. We were flat there as well, meaning we did not gain or lose in our outcome score, but when compared to others that are increasing at a faster rate than us, we moved from 38th on that ranking to 42nd. So you are right, that is a high correlating variable for us, and one that we are also trying to coordinate our work with some of the other fantastic organizations and committees trying to work on especially higher education and the K-12 pipeline in the Hispanic community. I see one more question here, and the question is, I was wondering what specific action steps you plan to implement to address the goals you identified. So we have three strategic committees, three strategic priority committees, and each of those has spent some time looking at initial tactics. So I'll take just a couple seconds here to go through, as we already highlighted, the importance of moving that median household income. I'll highlight some of the initiatives that we're doing in the Prosperity and Vitality Committee. One of those is we have identified that many of our college graduates might be underemployed but opportunity ready, meaning that they are not necessarily on the highest career trajectory in terms of earnings for themselves, and they may or may be in positions that don't require a college degree, so they are in underemployed status. We are looking at how are we connecting that group actively with the Region of Choice initiative, as we have, I believe, 90 companies now looking to increase their Hispanic manager base by 25%. So that is one specific action that we are doing in that area. The other is on the lower skilled front, we are specifically doing going to be implementing field experiences as soon as we're out of quarantine. So later this year, to expose somebody who may be in a career, a low-skilled career that caps out at $18 or $20 an hour, and getting them a field experience. So how do I get my toe wet and understand what advanced manufacturing and healthcare, those are our two starter industries that we're looking at because of the breadth of positions open, as well as the career trajectories that could take them. So we're looking to get them exposed to those, and then doing a management process through the process of getting them recruited, hired, and onboarded onto those organizations. We don't have any other questions, and I have taken you 4 minutes beyond our webinar time frame. But this, again, we will send out to all of you who have been on this call and share this information. So we will also have a link to this from our website so that you can continue to view it and share it. And we will start updating our data that's represented on both our materials and our websites. But again, it underscores the sense of urgency on this, and much more importantly now in a COVID-19 world. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Be safe and be healthy.